Hello everyone, and welcome to Fresh Master Channel. Today, we are going to have some story from Reddit. But before we start, don't forget to subscribe, like the video if you enjoyed it, and leave a comment down below. These simple clips mean a lot to the future of this channel.
I watched the snow being blown around by the wind and thought about how much things had gone downhill. Even the Christmas music in my office couldn't lift my spirits. Times were tough, and I was on the brink of bankruptcy. But I had a plan that I hoped would turn things around. I looked at the nameplate on my desk, Tom Ambrose, President. It stirred up a mix of sadness and pride, reminding me of when I bought the only radio station in town. It all started about 18 months ago when Windward Sporting Apparel announced they were shutting down all U.S. operations. The local factory in my hometown, Milton, North Carolina, which was the 5th largest employer in the county, was closing. Despite rumors, the decision was final, and nearly 200 people lost their jobs directly, with another 300 to 400 affected indirectly. The situation worsened when the local Walmart announced it would close once its new superstore opened nearby. Several other businesses, including CVS, followed suit, and the national economy tanked. Unemployment in our area soared to between 14% and 15%. As the local economy collapsed, the radio station where I worked lost about 40% of its advertisers. I struggled to pay bills and fell behind on the mortgage for the station and a new tower site. Edgar Brenner, the mortgage holder, was moving forward with foreclosure. I owed $37,000, and if I couldn't catch up, I would lose the land and all the money invested. Now it felt like all I did was juggle bills to keep from falling further behind. Owning a radio station had always been my dream. My passion for radio began in 2nd grade, watching the warm glow of the tube radio in the kitchen while my mom listened to WNEW in New York. William B. Williams's friendly talk and soft music made me envious of his warm studio, especially on cold mornings when I walked to school. By high school, my love for radio had turned into an obsession. I did the morning announcements and handled audio-visual aids for the school. I worked part-time during the school year and full-time in the summer, saving for my own radio station. Despite the challenges and advice to cut my losses, I refused to give up. I pursued a business degree with a state scholarship and my parents' support, knowing it would help when I finally owned a station. As soon as my parents left me in my dorm room freshman year, I sought out the college radio station and quickly signed up as a volunteer. By senior year, I was the station's manager, earning $500 a month. The only drawback was dealing with Chad Duncan III, the school newspaper editor, and an insufferable snob who boasted about his wealthy family's media empire. Chad and I clashed often, especially during budget meetings. I started attending these meetings as a sophomore and became deeply involved when I was appointed manager. Chad's ego grew as he became editor, and our first major conflict occurred when I submitted my budget for new equipment for the aging radio station. Chad, meanwhile, sought a budget increase for new computers and furniture for the newspaper, despite their recent shift to digital and reduced printing costs. When the budgets were approved, the radio station received a $40,000 increase, while the newspaper's budget was cut by $25,000. Chad was furious, and his resentment toward the radio station, and especially me, only grew. Since freshman year, Chad Duncan III had a girlfriend, Amanda Edwards, who was cute but not stunning. Chad broke up with her halfway through senior year, which devastated Amanda, a columnist and interior design major. She started working at the radio station, where I hired her as a roving reporter and editorial writer. Chad was furious about this and intensified his attacks on the station through the school newspaper. In retaliation, Chad complained to the college president, claiming we were misusing our budget on pizza and beer. Although we did have pizza and beer parties, we paid for them ourselves. I defended the station with receipts, and no action was taken against us. Despite my attempt to resolve the feud, Chad saw it as weakness and escalated his attacks. We eventually got our revenge with the help of computer science major Billy Williams. Billy figured out how to intercept and replace the newspaper's digital files with our own edited versions. We filled the paper with nonsense stories, limericks, incomplete sports scores, and silly editorials demanding things like nap time and beer from drinking fountains. When Chad saw the altered paper, he was furious. His staff found it hilarious, which only made him angrier. The campus loved the prank, but Chad was determined to find out who was behind it. He stormed into my office, accusing me of the prank, and vowed to get revenge. Despite the prank's success in stopping Chad's negative articles about us, the administration had reprimanded him for misusing his position. Chad was the type to hold a grudge. Meanwhile, Amanda and I began dating after the prank, eventually moving in together and getting married 6 months after graduation. Amanda started a job as an interior designer, and I became a stockbroker. We were both unhappy in our jobs. Amanda disliked her boss, and I felt the financial products I sold were subpar. A year later, Amanda announced she had quit her job to start her own interior design company. I was upset she hadn't consulted me first, but I wanted to support her. Looking back, this was the first sign of trouble in our marriage. With only one steady income, I was covering most of the bills. After we married, I split my bonuses between our new house fund and my radio station fund. 80% for the house and 20% for the station. Amanda contributed cash from her jobs to the house fund, but when she quit without discussing it, I changed the split to 50-50ths. Amanda was unhappy and stopped contributing, which should have been a warning sign. About a year later, my job offered me a chance to open a new office in Greenville, North Carolina. Amanda, facing challenges with her business in our current location, was excited about the move. The transition was smooth, and Amanda's business grew, though not as much as when she worked for a larger company. I received bonuses for opening and making the office profitable, but I still disliked the job. We settled into a rented house and explored nearby small towns on weekends. Amanda hunted for furniture and accessories while I searched for antique radios, including one like the model my mother used. On one of our day trips, Amanda and I visited Milton. After exploring the antique stores and having lunch, we wandered into a residential area. Amanda, captivated by the variety of houses, insisted we check out a 2-story colonial house with a for sale sign. It was an open house that day, so we went inside. While Amanda toured the house a second time, I noticed a radio station across the field behind it. The sign read, WJTW, 1590 AM, your hometown radio station, though the lettering was faded. I went to the station and met Mrs. Sylvia Porter, who was startled because she thought she had locked the door. She owned both the house and the station. Her husband had expanded the station years ago and built the colonial house for their family. After her husband's death 2 years ago, Mrs. Porter struggled to keep the station running and had turned it off 5 months prior. She was planning to sell the land, as the station's license was up for renewal and she wouldn't renew it. During my conversation with Mrs. Porter, it became clear she wanted to move to Florida to be near her daughters. She was frustrated because no offers had been made on the station, and the last 2 offers on the house had fallen through due to financing issues. She was reconsidering her decision not to finance the sale herself. I became very interested in buying the radio station. When I told Mrs. Porter I was keen but short on funds, she offered to hold a mortgage for me. Excited, I rejoined Amanda, who had fallen in love with the house and wanted to make an offer. I suggested we bid on both properties. Amanda initially wanted to use our funds solely for the house, as it needed repairs. However, I convinced her that buying both properties together would give us a better deal. By the end of our discussion, Amanda agreed. We made an offer of $200,000 for the house and $100,000 for the station, which was valued at $75,000. Mrs. Porter accepted and agreed to finance both sales, 4% for the house and 7% for the station. We signed the papers that day. 4 weeks later, we closed on both properties. We put $30,000 down on the house and $20,000 down on the station. The remaining funds would be used for house restoration and operating costs for the radio station. 2 days after closing, we moved into our new house. The 45-minute commute to Greenville was a hassle, but owning a radio station made it bearable, and the steady paycheck eased the burden of both mortgages. We immediately began renovating the house. A painter tackled the interior and exterior, while a flooring company refinished the hardwood floors, installed carpeting, and added tile in the kitchen and bathrooms. Amanda also arranged for a handyman to fix the windows and the railing. For the radio station, I hired Scott Wainwright, Mrs. Porter's former engineer, to assess our needs. His report detailed necessary upgrades, including a new automation system, which cost nearly $4,000 but promised to streamline operations. I programmed the station with a mix of hits from the 60s, 70s, 80s, and country classics, which proved popular with listeners. Scott also revealed that Fred Porter had previously planned to move the station's tower closer to Greenville, a move that would enhance the signal. Fred had secured FCC approval, but the application was about to expire. I renewed the application but put the project on hold due to the $125,000 cost for construction and new land, which I couldn't afford. I took a week off to help with house repairs and set up the new automation system at the radio station. After loading the music and adding station identifications, I turned the station back on. The response was great, and within 2 days, my first advertiser, Herb Canner from the local funeral home, signed up. Over the next 18 months, 2 issues loomed over my happiness. I still disliked my job and the long commute, and Amanda couldn't have children. She was indifferent about this and refused to consider adoption, which I missed as another red flag. I decided to quit my job in Greenville, but Amanda was upset since her interior design business wasn't thriving as expected. To convince her, I created a spreadsheet showing that quitting would not harm our lifestyle. I demonstrated that the radio station's income could cover nearly all our expenses, with a small $1,000 shortfall that I would make up by selling more ads. To sweeten the deal, I offered to advertise Amanda's business for free on the station. She liked the idea, especially voicing her own ads. This plan was part of my strategy to attract new advertisers. I visited local businesses, gave them small promotional items, and explained the benefits of radio advertising, encouraging them to record their own ads to create a personal connection with potential customers. For the next 3 years, I was living my dream with a loving wife and a successful radio station. But despite this high point, my life took a turn for the worse, and I faced losing everything. Determined to save the station and my own sanity, I fought hard to turn things around. One person relying on the station was Lou Talbert, a former DJ whose career was derailed by alcoholism. A month after relaunching the station, Lou showed up at the station smelling of alcohol but with a wealth of radio experience. I took a chance and hired him for the 7-9 a.m. slot, despite warnings from others. Lou initially struggled with his drinking but gradually quit and became a reliable part of the team. His morning show, though initially awkward, became a hit. He shared engaging stories and music, winning over listeners despite frequent technical mistakes. Another person who came to the station was Jimmy, a young man with red hair and an unkempt appearance. He came from a troubled background. His father had left, and his mother struggled with alcoholism while raising 4 children. I asked the boy what I could do for him, and he looked panicked, saying he'd leave. I stopped him and asked his name. He told me it was Jimmy Saunders. I offered him a tour of the station, and he was thrilled, clearly overwhelmed by the opportunity. He reminded me of myself at his age, mesmerized by the radio world. He seemed completely captivated as we moved from room to room. When the tour ended, Jimmy was reluctant to leave, so I suggested he could do some volunteer work at the station. His face lit up and he eagerly agreed. I gave him 2 WJTW t-shirts, which he clutched tightly, valuing them immensely. However, I mentioned he'd need to shower before coming in. His joy turned to panic as he explained they had no running water at home and couldn't use the high school locker room anymore. I reassured him that he could shower at the station if he brought clean clothes. That's how Jimmy started working for me. Initially, he just cleaned the station, but I soon taught him how to use the production equipment. He picked it up quickly and began producing commercials, earning $100 a week, which he used to support his siblings. After 3 months, I gave him an evening on-air shift. His show, which featured high school events and continued to play our music, became popular. With the show's success, Jimmy's standing in school improved, and he was no longer seen as an outcast. I taught Jimmy how to handle equipment at football games and eventually hired him for the afternoon drive time show. 2 years later, he was up for a DJ job in a bigger market. Jimmy also solved a big issue with broadcasting high school football games. With 5 high schools each wanting their games aired, he suggested we broadcast 2 games per school and hire students to record the other games. We'd then create a Saturday morning sports show combining highlights from all the games. This approach was a hit and resolved the issue. 2 years after buying the station, I found a 10-acre plot for the new tower. It was marshy land owned by Edgar Brenner, who demanded $8,000 per acre, well above its value. Despite trying to negotiate for just 5 acres, Brenner insisted on selling all 10 and offered only a high-interest 5-year mortgage. With no better options and the station able to handle the mortgage, I bought the land under his terms. About 6 months after buying the land, I needed a part-time bookkeeper to handle the books, answer phones, and manage bills. I wanted someone for 20 hours a week, paying around $200. I advertised but got no responses. Just as I was about to give up and wait until I could afford a full-time employee, a young woman knocked on my door one morning. She looked nervous and reminded me of Jimmy. She asked if the job was still available, holding up the ad from the paper. I invited her in. She was in her 20s, about 5'3", with light brown hair and a ponytail. Her clothes were wrinkled and her shoes were worn, but she had a pretty face and a shy smile. I introduced myself and asked her about her experience. She didn't have a resume and seemed worried when I asked. She had no bookkeeping experience, but knew how to use a word processor. She didn't know how to use a spreadsheet, which made me think she might not be right for the job. Then, a small child's voice called out. Tracy, the young woman, quickly got up and apologized, saying it was her daughter. I told her to bring the child in. The little girl, around 3 or 4, had blonde hair with a pink bow and a lollipop-stained smile. She held her mother's hand and sucked her thumb. After Tracy settled back in her seat, Kimberly climbed onto her lap, resting her head on her shoulder and asking if they could eat soon. Tracy explained they would after she finished. I offered Kimberly a cookie from a Tupperware container, which made her eyes light up. I gave her a couple more and mentioned they were homemade chocolate chip cookies from Mrs. Myers, who brings them weekly as a kind of bribe to keep playing certain music. Kimberly eagerly ate the cookies while Tracy had one too, keeping her gaze on me, clearly anxious about the job. Seeing Kimberly in Tracy's lap and recognizing her need, I decided to offer her the job. Tracy was thrilled and grateful. I told her I'd get a W-9 form ready to complete the paperwork. As I headed to get the form, I overheard Kimberly asking if they had to sleep in the car again that night because it was cold. Tracy's sad response made me reconsider. I returned to offer them a tour of the station, starting with the radio side. Kimberly was fascinated to see the live broadcast. I saved the residential part of the tour for last, explaining that the previous owners had lived in the building while raising their kids until they moved to a new house, which my wife and I later bought along with the station. I showed Tracy and Kimberly around the residential side of the station and then made an offer. I suggested they use the space at the station until they found their own place. I reassured her it was a common practice. Both Jimmy and Lou had stayed there before. Tracy seemed hesitant but appreciated the offer, saying they didn't have a place yet. I quickly put a new lock on the bedroom door and handed over the keys. I pointed out the fridge with leftover pizza and soda and reminded her to finish the cookies in my office. Tracy moved in and started working at the station. Though she initially said she'd find a place soon, she later admitted she couldn't afford one. She had left an abusive boyfriend and was grateful for the shelter. Hiring Tracy turned out to be a great decision. She mastered the spreadsheet program in no time, reorganized our file system, set up a billing schedule, and worked far more than the 20 hours she was hired for, without complaint. After 3 weeks, I felt bad for paying Tracy so little, so I raised her salary to $250 a week and offered her a 25% commission on any advertising sales she brought in. Tracy excelled in sales and soon earned an extra $500 a month in commissions. I enjoyed having Tracy and Kimberly around. Tracy was always willing to help, and Kimberly, though not allowed in the locked transmitter room, played in the studios when no one was working. Amanda wasn't pleased about Tracy and Kimberly staying at the station. She worried about the image despite knowing they were living out of their car. This should have been a warning sign, but I missed it. Despite this, things seemed perfect. Amanda's business was thriving thanks to our ads, and our neighbors were friendly. Mrs. Myers baked for us, and neighborhood kids played games in front of the station. I joined in when I could, even if I had to adjust my game to keep it fair. Henry Wilson, our retired Marine neighbor, was my favorite. He came over regularly for coffee and shared his stories, some X-rated but always entertaining. Though he grieved for his late wife, Ellie, and was battling cancer and heart issues, he never complained. He struggled financially with his medical bills and refused to go to the local VA hospital, which he deemed subpar. I agreed, thinking it was disgraceful how we treat many veterans. People often say you can count on death and taxes, but they're wrong. The only certainties are death and change, and my slice of paradise was no exception. The local economy started to crumble with the Windward factory's closure, followed by Walmart and a major drugstore leaving. Nationwide economic downturns hit everyone hard, including the radio station, which saw a 20% drop in ad revenue. I tried to mitigate the damage by bartering for essentials like gas and gym memberships. Things seemed to stabilize briefly, but then the Braxton Machine Company, a major local employer, moved its operations to Mexico, causing further economic strain. Smaller businesses began to fail, prompting the Chamber of Commerce to seek new businesses to replace lost jobs. I was elected to the committee working on this. Then Chad Duncan III arrived, a new player in our little town. His family owned numerous newspapers, magazines, and TV stations. Chad hired Amanda to decorate the office for his new newspaper, the Milton Free Press. Despite my unease, I didn't act on it. The chamber saw Chad's move as a positive sign, but it was misleading. The newspaper hired only 3 locals and outsourced everything else, including printing. I had several chances to talk with Chad at chamber and civic events. He seemed friendly, and I thought our college differences were behind us. Chad appeared to fit in well, donating generously and joining local service clubs. He was expanding his family's media business into the Southeast, with plans for new newspapers and a fishing and hunting magazine. Despite his business ambitions, Chad seemed more focused on helping Amanda with her business. Amanda started coming home later and staying overnight in Greenville for meetings, which were major red flags. I noticed Amanda distancing herself from me and tried to win her back with flowers, gifts, and dates, but nothing worked. I tracked her phone and discovered she was spending nights with Chad. Furious, I contemplated confronting him, but realized it would only land me in trouble. Amidst my economic struggles, my wife of 8 years betrayed me for someone I despised. It was incredibly painful. I decided to end things myself rather than beg like my Uncle Fred, who had a breakdown after his wife left him. When I came home one night, I found Amanda and Chad in the living room. Amanda, looking nervous, and Chad with a smirk, were ready to tell me it was over. It dawned on me that Chad had finally gotten his revenge for our college prank by taking my wife. 2 things helped me cope with my divorce. First, when Amanda told me she wanted a divorce, I maintained a calm demeanor and simply said, "Okay with me." My lack of visible emotion seemed to unsettle Amanda and frustrate Chad, which reinforced my decision to act as if the divorce was no big deal. Second, during negotiations, Amanda wanted the house, and I wanted the radio station. She suggested getting half of the station, but I calmly told her she could have it, including half of its debts, which made her reconsider. We agreed to appraise both the house and the station. The house was valued $20,000 to $40,000 more than the station, but Amanda complained about paying even $10,000 based on the lower estimates. Despite her complaints, I stayed composed and asked my attorney to seek alimony from Amanda, who was earning more from her business, thanks in part to Chad. Amanda was infuriated by this, and the divorce stalled until I suggested a face-to-face meeting. While managing the station financially, I also spent time devising ways to get back at Amanda and Chad, eventually coming up with a couple of plans to hurt them a bit. The first thing I did was pull all of Amanda's commercials from the air and offer an incredibly low rate to Maggie's Interior Designs, a competitor. When Amanda found out and called me, she was furious. "You've got to be kidding me, Amanda," I said incredulously. "We're getting a divorce. You didn't seriously think I'd continue to run your commercials for free?" I then made it clear I had no available time slots for her, which only made her angrier. Next, I targeted Chad's businesses. I approached his advertisers and convinced them to split their ad budgets between his papers and my radio station. Surprisingly, about 40% of them agreed, providing a small boost to our revenue and infuriating Chad. As the divorce dragged on, Amanda and Chad flaunted their relationship around town, which upset me further. I instructed my attorney to let Amanda's lawyer know we'd go to court if necessary. At a tense meeting, Chad showed up and refused to leave, prompting me to suggest ending the meeting and letting the court handle it. After a brief discussion, Amanda's attorney invited us back in, and Chad stormed out. "I can't understand why you treated me so poorly. If you wanted to end our marriage, you didn't have to cheat on me. All you had to do was ask for a divorce, and I would have agreed. I expected more from you, and I'm deeply disappointed." Amanda's face turned bright red, but she didn't apologize. Honestly, I wasn't expecting one. My lawyer stepped in at this point. "Mrs. Ambrose, I have records of your earnings for the past 2 years, as well as Tom's. You earned about $30,000 more annually than Tom. The court would likely approve alimony payments between $300 and $500 a month." "That's just ridiculous," Amanda retorted. "Tom, if you're trying to get back at me, I'll fight this." I just gave a sad smile and replied calmly, "Amanda, I don't actually want the alimony, but you aren't even willing to pay me half of the lower value between the 2 properties. Your attorney will probably advise you that the court will make you pay at least $10,000, and likely $15,000 if they average the appraisals. There's even a chance they might go with the higher appraisal, which would be $20,000. Plus, alimony might still be added. So why don't we settle on $15,000, and I'll waive the alimony?" Amanda stared at me for a long time, and her anger seemed to fade as she calculated the situation. It was evident that any love she once had for me was gone. After a lengthy silence, Amanda agreed to the deal. "I guess we're finished here," I said, trying to sound upbeat. Before leaving the conference room, I walked over to Amanda, kissed the top of her head, and said, "I hope you and Chad find happiness together." I paused at the door and glanced back to wave. There was now a look of uncertainty and confusion on her face. It was a small victory, but it felt satisfying. Two things helped me get through my divorce, and Tracy and Kimberly were probably the most crucial. They were bright spots in a time filled with pain and sadness. Even though my relationship with Tracy had always been strictly professional, it was comforting to have her support. Tracy was shocked by Amanda's actions. The divorce brought a lot of changes, though. When I needed to move out of the house I had shared with Amanda, Tracy offered to find an apartment. I told her not to bother with an apartment. We could share the house instead. "Don't spend your money on a new place. I'll just lock my bedroom door so you don't get any ideas," I joked. Tracy turned red, and I immediately felt guilty. "I'm only kidding. We'll be roommates unless you prefer your own place." No, Tracy quickly said. "Kimberly and I love it here. We'd really like you to stay with us full time." Their presence was a relief since I couldn't have managed the loneliness along with everything else. Tracy and Kimberly's company helped me heal as the weeks passed. We started off as employer and employee, but soon became friends, and then very close friends. About 2 months after my divorce, I mustered the courage to ask Tracy out on a date. The night of our first date with Tracy was eye-opening. She looked stunning in a sundress and makeup. We quickly became a couple, started sleeping together, and even discussed marriage. Amanda and Chad were fading into the past, but then Tracy and Kimberly disappeared, and it was my fault. It all started with my family's china, which I'd inherited but never used. Amanda had asked for it, and I agreed, not realizing it would upset Tracy. She felt I was still letting Amanda have her way, and our argument escalated. The next morning, Tracy and Kimberly were gone. I was devastated, but had to focus on a crucial presentation that night. We'd spent months trying to attract new businesses to Milton. Then, I read that Sterling Pharmaceuticals was moving some manufacturing back to the U.S. They were considering North Carolina, Oregon, and California. Oregon was out due to unrest, and California due to high taxes and regulations, leaving North Carolina as the top choice. Our committee had worked hard on our proposal, and Milton was a finalist. We had a promising site with a 400-acre industrial park, close to the interstate, and with a rail spur. Everything now depended on our presentation in Asheville that night. I was chosen to give the presentation to Sterling Pharmaceuticals. We had everything ready on 6 thumb drives, with mine containing the visuals. If Sterling picked our location, it would bring hundreds of construction jobs and 250 permanent positions. Abbott Medical Supply also showed interest in our area if Sterling chose us. The presentation was scheduled for 7 p.m. in Asheville, and I was preparing tax forms at 2:15 p.m. when I noticed an unusual silence on the radio. I rushed to the studio and found the music was being transmitted, but the main transmitter had shut down. Jimmy offered to switch to the backup transmitter while I investigated the main one. The backup, though operational, was old and prone to overheating. I asked Jimmy to contact our engineer, Scott. 10 minutes later, Jimmy returned with Scott on the line. Scott, working 3 towns away, said he couldn't come immediately, but would come the next day if needed. He advised opening a window in the transmitter room to cool it and removing the back of the transmitter. With a blizzard coming, he suggested closing the window later and turning the thermostat down to 55 degrees to prevent overheating. I instructed Jimmy to close the window and lower the heat before he left. I also asked him to check on Henry across the street, who was having trouble shoveling snow. Jimmy agreed and reminded me to get on the road quickly due to the storm. As I drove toward Asheville, snow began to fall heavily, reducing visibility and making me anxious about being late. I decided to take a mountain road that, while risky in winter, would cut about 40 miles off my trip. My phone rang just as I was deciding whether to take the mountain road. It was Stan Willard, the mayor and chamber president, who was panicked because he'd forgotten his thumb drive, and Anne couldn't come due to a family emergency. He insisted it was crucial that I make it to the presentation, as Sterling Pharmaceuticals was likely to choose our location. Reassured that I was still an hour away and confident in my snow tires, I took the mountain road. The snow and wind were manageable, but then an animal crossed my path. I swerved to avoid it, causing my car to skid and flip. The car rolled 3 times, hitting at least 1 tree before I lost consciousness. When I woke up, the car was upside down and partially crushed. I felt severe pain in my right leg, could move my arms and left leg, but my right foot was stuck. My driver's side window was shattered, and blood covered my face. I felt woozy and nauseous. I managed to pull out my phone and dial 911, but I had no service and a nearly dead battery. It hit me hard. I wouldn't make the presentation and had lost my chance to save the radio station. Trapped and freezing, I felt despair as I thought about letting everyone down. As I lay in the wrecked car, going in and out of consciousness, I realized how much I'd failed. I was cold, in pain, and coughing up blood. Just when I felt ready to give up, I heard someone approaching. It was Henry. "Tom, thank God I found you," Henry said as he reached me. "What are you doing here?" I asked weakly. "I came looking for you," he replied. "I thought you'd take the mountain road. I tried calling for help but had no signal, so I walked the last stretch." I coughed up more blood and said, "I messed everything up. I should have stayed on the main road. Now the whole area will suffer." Henry, sounding almost angry, said, "Stop blaming yourself. If it weren't for you, Sterling might not have even heard of our area." Exhausted, I said, "I'm so tired, Henry. I just want to give up." Henry insisted, "Stop it, Tom. You're not a loser." I tried to laugh but ended up coughing harshly. The fading light from my car made it hard to see, but I felt hopeless. "I'm such a loser, Henry," I said through my coughs. "My wife left me, the radio station's failing, and Tracy left too. Maybe coming to Milton was a mistake. If I hadn't, Amanda wouldn't have met Chad, and I'd probably still be married." Henry shook his head. "You can't really believe that." "I do," I replied. "Everything would be better if I hadn't come here. But it looks like I won't make it out alive. I'm so cold and in so much pain." Henry, with tears in his eyes, said firmly, "I don't buy that. If you hadn't come to Milton, I wouldn't have met you. You've been one of the best things for our town." I was shocked by his emotion. "You've been kind, Henry, but even my own father didn't think much of me. I'm a screw-up and I'm too tired to care." Henry insisted, "You're wrong. I'm going to prove it. But right now we need to keep you alive. Don't bother. I'm not worth it." Bullcrap. Henry cleared a space around the window by sweeping away the snow, exposing some dry leaves, twigs, and sticks. He used old gas receipts and crumpled leaves as kindling, arranging the sticks on top. Using a lighter given to him by his wife, he started a fire. As the fire began to burn, it warmed my face, though my body throbbed with pain. Henry continued to feed the fire, and while it provided some warmth, I stared at the flames, lost in thought about my life's failures. I don't know if I fell asleep or passed out, but I had a haunting dream. I was outside the house Amanda and I rented in Greenville, with a young man I didn't recognize. "This is where I used to live," I said. "Yes, I know," he replied. I saw a new Mercedes in the driveway, and Amanda, dressed in a revealing nightie, kissing a man. Amanda said to him, "Tom will be home soon, so I need to get cleaned up. He's in line for a promotion, and once he gets it, I'll file for divorce." I was stunned and began yelling at my wife. "Get your cheating ass out of my house!" Neither of them even glanced my way. Apparently, they couldn't hear me. "They can't hear you," the young man said. "You once mentioned that if you hadn't come to Milton, you'd still be married to Amanda." "Well, you were right about that. You're still married to her. Is this the perfect marriage you envisioned?" I started up the driveway, wanting to do some damage to the guy sleeping with my wife. I had never hit a woman before, but I was seriously considering making an exception for Amanda. Just as I was about to take another step, the scene shifted. When the image refocused, I found myself standing in the snow outside a rundown trailer, with the young man still beside me. A police car and an ambulance were parked out front with their lights flashing. I recognized the trailer park, but noticed it was much more dilapidated than I remembered from my last visit. Another police car arrived, and an officer got out. The newly arrived officer asked about the scene, and Fred explained it was an overdose case involving a young man named Sunders. They described him as a troublemaker with a history of criminal behavior. I cried out, "No, it can't be Jimmy." I had helped him graduate high school and made his ceremony special, but the young man with me said that didn't happen because I never moved to Milton. The officers then mentioned Lou Talbot, found dead in an alley with a bottle of scotch. I was devastated, knowing Lou had stopped drinking. The young man confirmed Lou hadn't given up drinking because he had no reason to. As I wept, the scene shifted. I found myself on an empty main street in Milton, with many vacant stores. The town was struggling and far from thriving. I struggled to my feet and asked, "What happened? The economy was bad, but not this bad." The young man explained, "You never moved here. No one knew about Sterling Pharmaceuticals, so they set up elsewhere. Without you, no progress was made. The town has hit rock bottom and will take a long time to recover, if it ever does." In shock, I watched the scene shift. I found myself at an abandoned Walmart, where a single car stood in the shadows. It was Tracy's car. As I ran over, I saw Tracy and Kimberly in the back seat, huddled under a thin blanket. I screamed, "Wake up, Tracy! Please wake up!" But they were dead. "This can't be," I cried. "Tracy had a key to the station. She wouldn't have left Kimberly in the cold." The young man said softly, "There is no station because you never came to Milton." Overwhelmed, I collapsed onto the snow-covered parking lot, weeping uncontrollably. When I opened my eyes, I saw Henry tending to the small fire. "How do you feel?" he asked, clearly worried. "Not good," I replied weakly. Henry said he would look for help and instructed me to stay awake. "If you go to sleep, you won't wake up." I watched him climb the embankment until he disappeared from view. The dream had felt so real that my tears had frozen on my cheeks. I was in intense pain and struggling to breathe, but the exhaustion made me want to close my eyes. Despite my effort to stay awake, I could feel myself losing the battle. Just as my eyes closed, I heard voices calling my name. I tried to respond, but was too weak. The voices grew louder, and soon an EMT was kneeling in front of me. "Mr. Ambrose, can you hear me?" he shouted. I nodded. The EMT checked my pulse and instructed others to hurry. "He's in bad shape. We need to get him out of here now." While the EMT rubbed my face and hands to warm me, others added wood to the fire. It grew larger, providing more warmth, but I was still extremely tired and in pain, with little warmth reaching my legs. All I wanted was to sleep. I heard a loud buzzing, and the metal of my car groaned as they used the jaws of life to free me. The noise was intense, but eventually they got me out and placed me on a stretcher. In the ambulance, I was barely conscious but felt a surge of self-loathing. Though I had been ready to give up, I vowed to never quit again. I resolved to keep the station running as long as possible, even if it meant being dragged out. Things then became fuzzy. The last thing I heard was, "Get him prepped for surgery, stat." Later, I woke up in darkness, feeling someone holding my hand, but I faded out again. When I next woke, it was daytime, and I was alone. Dr. Anderson, my primary care physician, was beside my bed. He said, "You had 4 broken ribs, 1 punctured a lung, and 3 broken bones in your right foot. Hypothermia was the biggest concern. The fire likely saved your life." "I didn't start the fire," I corrected him. "Henry did." Dr. Anderson looked puzzled. "Henry Wilson? That's not possible. He died of a heart attack yesterday. Jimmy Sunders found him and called 911. "That can't be," I insisted. "Henry found me and started the fire." Dr. Anderson explained, "What you saw was likely a hallucination. You were severely injured, freezing, and your mind defaulted to someone you trusted. It's a common reaction in such extreme situations." I considered the doctor's explanation and accepted it. Made more sense than the idea of a dead man starting a fire for me. A few hours after waking up in ICU, I was moved to a regular room. As my mind cleared, I felt deep sadness, not about the station, but for Henry, Tracy, and Kimberly. Henry, my first real friend in the neighborhood, had become like family. Despite his tough past, including a difficult service in Vietnam and losing his wife Ellie, he remained kind and supportive. I felt honored to have been part of his life. I pushed these thoughts aside and focused on the station's situation. When I called, I was relieved Jimmy answered. He assured me that Scott had fixed the main transmitter and ordered the necessary parts. I wanted to talk more, but had to end the call when Stan entered the room. "Thank God we found you, Tom," Stan said shakily. "We had half the town searching for you. You scared everyone." "I'm sorry for all this and missing the Sterling meeting," I replied. "I shouldn't have taken the mountain road." "Don't worry about it," Stan said, patting my shoulder. I gave part of the presentation and then explained what happened. "I had to leave to help search for you." "I'm sure we'll get a rejection letter soon," I said, feeling even more defeated. "I'm not so sure," Stan said. "Mr. Sterling called this morning to check on you. He wants to meet you because he's impressed by how the whole town rallied to find you." I was uncertain about Jeff Sterling wanting to meet me, but assumed the new plant project was likely dead. "Stan, I have files on 6 other companies interested in expanding or relocating. Please take them and have the committee start working on new proposals." "I'll get the files," Stan said, "but don't worry about anything except getting better. They're planning to discharge you tomorrow." "I'll try not to worry. But yes, they're releasing me tomorrow," I said, showing him my casted foot. "I'll be on crutches for a few weeks. Let me know if you need anything," Stan said before leaving. A little later, Tracy appeared at my doorway. My heart lifted. "Can I come in?" she asked, her smile uncertain. "Yes, please," I said, opening my arms. "I'm so happy to see you. I'm sorry I caused you to leave. I'm not keeping Amanda's dishes." Tracy hugged me tightly and silenced me with her hand. It wasn't about the dishes. I was just jealous and thought you still had feelings for Amanda. I don't care about Amanda anymore, I reassured her. Time has healed my heart. I realized I was never her true love, and she never really got over Chad. But you don't just stop loving someone, Tracy said quietly. I was afraid you were still in love with her because she's beautiful, and I felt plain. Stop that, I said. You're beautiful too, and you have nothing to worry about. I don't love or hate Amanda anymore. I've found someone much better. I kissed her, and she responded passionately. Holding me close, she whispered, I love you so much. As Tracy sat by my bed, Kimberly peeked around the doorway. Is it time yet, Mommy? Yes, you can come in, Tracy said. Is Mr. Tom still mad at us? Kimberly asked anxiously. No, Mr. Tom was never mad at you, I assured her. In fact, I love both of you. Kimberly beamed and rushed toward me, but Tracy caught her just in time. The next day, Jimmy drove me back to the station. Tracy had cleared a path for me to navigate on crutches. While I was recovering physically, the station and my finances were in serious trouble. I was behind on bills, facing foreclosure on the new tower's land, and near losing electricity. My staff had agreed to half pay, but I struggled to meet that. Tracy refused any payment and was economizing everywhere. She extended printer cartridges, made notepads from used paper, refilled old water bottles, bought food from the dollar store, and found a thrift coat for Kimberly. Meanwhile, she was also out searching for new advertisers. I was deeply moved when Kimberly came to my office with her piggy bank, offering it to help pay the bills. I kissed her, thanked her, and told her to save it for something nice for her mother. I felt completely overwhelmed and lost, but the one thing I held on to was Tracy and Kimberly. The thought of not being able to provide for them was crushing. By the day before Christmas, I was in a deep rut, but then 3 unexpected visitors arrived just when I needed them most. The first visitor showed up at my office shortly after 9 in the morning. He was a tall, distinguished man with short brown hair and a warm smile. I hoped he was an advertiser or someone who could help, but he was neither. He introduced himself as Jeffrey Sterling, and although I was standing on one foot and trying to balance, I managed to greet him. He told me he had come to meet the man who got an entire town searching for him. Jeffrey explained that he was impressed by how the town rallied for me, especially when the mayor interrupted his presentation to help find me. He was even more impressed by the real presentation I sent him. He revealed that Sterling Pharmaceuticals had decided to build its new plant here. The papers were signed and construction should start within a month. He said it was now official and encouraged me to announce it on the air. With that, Jeffrey left, and I felt a renewed sense of hope. I hobbled into the production room and quickly put together an announcement about the big news, setting it to play every hour for the rest of the day. Almost immediately after it aired, my phone started ringing off the hook. For the next couple of hours, I fielded calls, mainly from committee members, reassuring them that the news was legit. The announcement was a huge win for the area, but I felt it was too late for me. With the bank unlikely to approve a loan until January, I was on the brink of losing everything. Just after 11 a.m., John Zornbeck, a local attorney and Rotary Club member, arrived. I'd tried to get him to advertise on the station before, but he always declined. Today, he was there for a different reason. John, who had been Henry Wilson's attorney for years, informed me that Henry had set up a living trust before he died. Henry's estate included around $45,000 in investments and his house, which was paid off. While I was on the phone with Stan, who was just learning about the Sterling deal, John handed me a cashier's check for $45,973.53. He also gave me the keys to Henry's house, which I could choose to live in or sell. The house was worth between $225,000 and $250,000, and I immediately asked John to put it on the market. After John left, I called Stan to update him on the news from Jeff Sterling. Stan was thrilled, barely able to contain his excitement. I told him I needed to run some errands and would catch up later. As I looked at the cashier's check, I felt overwhelmed by Henry's generosity and love. It made me think back to the dream I had while trapped in my car, and I was convinced it was Henry's influence that pulled me through. I called for Tracy, who rushed in with Kimberly, both worried. I showed them the check and explained that Henry had left everything to me. John had cashed in his investments and given me the check. We needed to deposit it and pay our most urgent bills, and I wanted to apply for a short-term line of credit. Running errands that day felt incredibly satisfying. With Tracy's help, we prioritized paying the electric and gas bills along with back pay, totaling about $4,500. At the bank, Sly Albert helped us calculate the payoff for the land, leaving us with just under $1,400. Sly assured me that securing a $25,000 line of credit wouldn't be a problem given the inheritance. After wrapping up our tasks, I took Tracy and Kimberly out to lunch. Tracy hesitated, worried about spending money, but I insisted. We'd settled our critical bills and arranged for a short-term loan, plus we could expect around $200,000 from selling Henry's house. Kimberly was thrilled when I took them to IHOP, her favorite place. Back home, Tracy and I decided to explore Henry's house. I'd been there before, but never really looked through his closets or cellar. The house was typical for a bachelor. Clean but wrinkled clothes, a fridge full of frozen dinners, and a closet of Christmas decorations Henry had stopped using in the past 2 years due to his health. One of the bedrooms was locked, but I had the key and was surprised to find a tool collection inside. About 30 tools, including 5 valuable antiques. I sold the antiques for nearly $10,000 and kept a Glock 40mm, selling the rest for $12,000. During our visit to Henry's house, Billy Richards, the EMT who had first found me, showed up. He returned some items from my car, including my 9mm Glock and a lighter with a Marine emblem. The lighter was definitely Henry's, though he'd never been in my car. I accepted it, puzzled. Before leaving, Tracy grabbed Henry's photo albums. That night, we watched It's a Wonderful Life while having dinner in front of a fire lit with Henry's lighter. I've always loved It's a Wonderful Life, but during the movie, I realized how closely it mirrored my own experiences. Unlike the movie, I didn't have a literal angel. My ordeal was a wake-up call that reminded me of my core values. After the movie, I tucked Kimberly into bed and joined Tracy, who was looking through Henry's photo albums. I was struck by a photo of a young Henry and his wife, Ellie. The young Henry in the picture was the same person who had appeared in my dream. I understood then that Henry had been my real angel. The Christmas was unforgettable. I was with my loved ones, and thanks to Henry's generosity, my financial worries were eased. Although the economy was still tough, optimism filled the town. 6 months later, Tracy and I got married, and 7 months after that, we had a son named Henry. His birth came with challenges. His lungs were underdeveloped, and he struggled with fatigue. When COVID-19 hit, our fears grew. Henry contracted the virus, starting with a mild cough and fever. Despite conventional treatments failing, our doctor, who researched alternative methods, eventually administered less common drugs. However, Henry's condition continued to worsen, and we were advised to prepare for the worst. Only one of us could be with Henry at a time, so Tracy and I took turns at his bedside. While I struggled, Tracy was barely holding it together. My biggest worry was Kimberly, who had taken on a motherly role with Henry since his birth. She was devastated and spent much of her time crying in her room, clutching Henry's teddy bear. On the 8th morning, I woke up to find Henry awake and watching me. He smiled and asked for pancakes, which was a joyful moment for me. The nurse suggested starting with apple juice and toast, and Henry ate it eagerly. From then on, he improved daily, and after 3 more days, we could take him home. Bringing Henry home was a moment of great relief, especially for Kimberly, who was overjoyed and wouldn't leave his side. I had to set some limits on her mothering. That was 16 years ago. Tracy and I are still happily married, despite life's ups and downs. Kimberly injured her ACL playing soccer in college, but eventually recovered. I've had appendix and hernia surgeries, and Tracy had a scare with a breast lump that turned out to be benign. Henry's lungs eventually developed as expected, and he played football and baseball in high school, though he didn't pursue sports in college. Kimberly went to Wingate University for nursing, while Henry attended Tyler University nearby, majoring in communications. Kimberly graduated as a physician's assistant and now works at a small practice in Milton. Henry followed me into the radio business, sharing my passion for it and becoming a skilled salesman. Tracy and I wanted more children, but Tracy's medical issues led to a hysterectomy, so we focused on our 2 kids and our radio station, where Tracy still works. Amanda and Chad married but divorced 5 years later after Chad's failed company expansion and a rumored affair. Amanda returned to her old house across the field and resumed her business. One day, Amanda unexpectedly showed up at my office, seeking to advertise her business again on our station. Despite my initial hesitation, we worked out the details, and she recorded her commercials. As we finished, Amanda apologized for her past actions, attributing her behavior to Chad's influence. I was initially stunned by Amanda's apology, but appreciated it and agreed to be distant friends. We only interact at civic events, and strangely, Tracy and Amanda get along better than Amanda and I do. Amanda's business is thriving, though her personal life isn't, with 2 failed engagements. I sold Henry's house for $211,000 and used most of it to build a new tower and station in Milton, along with a small studio on the tower site. The move boosted our business significantly. Lou still works at the station and has been sober for years, now happily dating someone. Jimmy moved to a larger station in Charlotte where he's a top performer. He's engaged to a local girl and plans to marry in August. Although Jimmy can't visit Milton regularly anymore, he occasionally drops by incognito, and everyone knows it's him. Chad, who had always been arrogant and vindictive, tried to get back at me after Amanda and I married. He convinced his parents to buy an FM station in Greenville, overpaying by $200,000. His lack of business acumen led to its failure, and when his parents decided to sell, the station was in poor shape. I bought it for $395,000, moved its FM antenna to our new AM location to boost power, and Henry managed to make it break even. Many of Chad's newspapers failed, but the one in Milton is still running under new ownership. The new owners and I have a successful advertising partnership. Chad is rumored to be working at a newspaper in Maine, but his brother Michael will now run TriStar, as Chad's father has retired. It's Christmas again, and we watch It's a Wonderful Life every year in front of the fireplace, lit with Henry's old lighter. I'm grateful for Henry's protection and want to share a final story. After recovering from COVID, Henry told me he dreamed of walking toward a bright light, but was stopped by a soldier who led him back, saying they'd see us all again someday. I've shared that story just a few times, and naturally, only my family really believes it. Whether others believe it or not doesn't matter to me. Ever since my car accident, I've felt that Henry has been watching over me like a guardian angel, and I'm grateful to have been his friend. Happy holidays, and as Tiny Tim remarked, bless us all.